Let's talk about a game that doesn't waste time asking for your attention. It earns it the moment you fire your first shot or drop-kick a guy through a window. Suit for Hire is loud, fast, and completely unashamed of what it is. A stylish, over-the-top power fantasy where you're the one-man cleanup crew, mowing through bad guys with equal parts elegance and brutality. At its core, this is a top-down shooter, but it doesn't stop there. You can switch on the fly between a bird's-eye view and an over-the-shoulder third-person camera, and this simple feature changes everything. In top-down mode, you're playing tactically, clearing rooms, watching angles, managing crowd control. Flip to third person, and it suddenly feels like a high-budget action film. You see the flips, the finishers, the way your character moves, fluid, deliberate, lethal. It's like John Wick got dropped into an isometric Hotline Miami level, and somehow it works. The story here is minimal, but it doesn't need to be deep. You're a professional assassin. You take contracts. You clear out targets in beautifully designed spaces. What makes it all sing is the variety in how you can approach each encounter. Sure, you've got your pistols, shotguns, assault rifles, and SMGs, but you're not just relying on bullets. You're rolling into melee like a black-suited tornado, snapping necks, using flying kicks, elbow drops, environmental kills. You name it. And it's not just for show. The melee system is tight, reactive, and fun in a way most shooters never even attempt. You're not just shooting between reload animations. You're using the momentum of combat itself. Run out of ammo? No problem. Kick a guy into a wall, take his weapon mid-fight, and keep the action going without missing a beat. It rewards improvisation and situational awareness, which keeps things feeling fresh even several hours in. Now, let's talk about the level design. There's a surprising amount of variety here. Each mission is its own playground of chaos, with distinct aesthetics and layouts. You'll fight through nightclubs, warehouses, suburban homes, high-rise rooftops, and more. Some areas are tight and claustrophobic, forcing you into close-quarters brawling, while others are wide open, giving you room to pick enemies off or pull off dramatic escapes. The arenas and challenge levels are worth mentioning too. These are less about narrative and more about pure skill testing. They throw waves of enemies at you, strip you down to basic loadouts, and dare you to survive using whatever you can grab. It's a great way to hone your instincts. And if you're the kind of player who chases mastery, this is where the game really sinks its hooks in. Visually, the game leans into sharp contrasts, clean environments, snappy animations, and bursts of stylized violence. It doesn't aim for photorealism, but what it does offer is a world that feels deliberately crafted for action. Every motion, every gunshot, every kick, it's all dialed in to feel responsive and cinematic. Now, this isn't a massive open-world experience. Don't come in expecting a sprawling story with dramatic cutscenes and emotional arcs. Suit for Hire knows exactly what kind of game it is. It respects your time. It wants to throw you into beautiful chaos, let you experiment with movement and violence, and reward you for style just as much as efficiency. There's no bloat, no filler, just skill, speed, and spectacle. One of the most underrated things about this game is how it invites you to get better without ever feeling punishing. Deaths aren't frustrating, they're lessons. Each run teaches you something. Which angle you didn't check, which combo flowed better, which room can be cleared faster. And when you nail it, when everything clicks, it feels incredible. That rhythm, that momentum, that moment where you clear a room in 6 seconds using nothing but movement, fists, and flawless timing, it's hard to put into words. It's the kind of adrenaline rush that makes you hit restart just to do it better. So who is Suit for Hire for? If you love precision-based shooters with just enough chaos to keep you on edge. If you've ever wanted to blend the movement of My Friend Pedro, the tactical edge of Hotline Miami, and the third-person flair of Max Payne. If you appreciate games that give you the tools, but leave the execution up to your instincts, then this game is for you. It's not trying to reinvent the genre. It's refining it, polishing it, cranking it up to 11, and letting you loose in the middle of it all. Suit for Hire is the type of game you can pick up for 15 minutes and end up playing for 3 hours because you told yourself, just one more run. It doesn't hold your hand, and it doesn't need to. You're here to suit up, clean house, and walk out like nothing happened. And in this world of endless games demanding your time, it's refreshing to find one that respects your skills instead.